you have a history of using offensive language, like the R word, the N word, including the N word with a hard R, calling women bitches, talking about rape in a nonchalant way. Um, what part of that do you regret, and what part of that do you not?
In this video, Destiny sits down with Lex Fridman on the Lex Fridman podcast. Destiny and Lex Fridman discuss when toxic language goes too far, as well as Destiny's history of using hateful, vile rhetoric. With that, let's watch Lex Fridman expose Destiny's lack of moral character. Not that we needed any more evidence.
Let's go there. You have a history of using offensive language, like the R word, the N word, including the N word with a hard R, calling women bitches, talking about rape in a nonchalant way. What part of that do you regret, and what part of that do you not?
Language is very complicated. When it comes to stuff relating to slurs, there's been like a whole trajectory of feelings on everything related to language. So
For you personally and for the internet as a whole.
yeah, I don't care about the internet. Almost for me personally. In my early 20s, I'll say like 22, 23, I think probably when I first started streaming, my feeling is that any word is just a word, and if it hurts you, that's your fault. Take responsibility for yourself. This probably came from my background of being like a really independent person, so that's just kind of like the mind that I had for everything. And they were like a collection of experiences that I had that as I grew, I started to realize like, okay, well, I feel differently about some of these words depending on the context, and I can see how they can affect other people depending on the context. So as I've kind of like grown, I think I've developed a more sophisticated understanding of how different words are used and how they affect people, whether they like it or not, and more importantly, whether I like it or not. And that words can, even if I don't want it to be, they can be a vehicle for emboldening certain types of ideas that I don't want to embolden. And yeah, that's kind of been the whole like growth. I've been lucky that in the time that I came up on the internet, I was able to learn these lessons, because if I was trying to learn those same lessons today, I would have been completely destroyed, because I had insane views on language like 10 years ago.
We could talk about the past, or we could talk about the present. Let's talk about the past first. So
Is Destiny actually arguing that he felt like when he was 22, he could do and say whatever he wanted, but now he's learned from that? The way he described that, first of all, he hasn't learned from that. And the description he gave of his behavior and his thought process about language at 22, he precisely described his personality right now to a T. His lack of self-awareness is astonishing. He's acting like he cares about words hurting people. Get the hell out of here. He's a liar. He does whatever he wants at all times. In his eyes, he comes first, and he never has any consideration for other people's feelings. He's very quick to escalate a conversation with nasty words and insults from what I've seen, like on his streams and in debates. And I'm certainly no behavioral psychologist, but I think maybe unconsciously, or maybe consciously, despite all of his success, he's still super insecure, because the way he behaves, like I said, on his streams and in debates, it takes so little to set him off, and he starts screaming and yelling, and oftentimes he starts trying to escalate the confrontation with nasty language. Something that makes me super uncomfortable is how often his insults are overtly sexual, with a heavy emphasis on banging people in the butt. Honestly, I bet I could make a 2-hour-long compilation of him telling people that he's going to F them in the A. And obviously what makes that even creepier is what we know about his predilections. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
in the past, saying the N word, including the N word with a hard R.
So generally,
And what's the context? Can you give me like
yeah,
in your
so-
memory what would be the context usually?
when I lay out this defense, it's not because I wouldn't have used the N-word. Generally, whenever I said the N-word, it was usually in an example of like, this is something that like a racist person would say. I don't think I've ever, on the internet, I don't think I've ever called anybody like the N-word with a hard R. Not because I wouldn't have, but just because it wasn't in my vocabulary. I played RTS, real-time strategy, and we used the F slur for gay people. That's the one, and I use that one a ton. I've called people that a ton in the past.
So I should actually just, as a small tangent.
Yeah, go for it.
And this is what I'd like to explore with you.
Mhm.
There's a ruthlessness to the language in the gaming world.
Yeah.
And there's different communities. they have different flavors of
Of hate
language,
speech, yeah.
of hate speech, essentially. And there's also a humor to it,
Mhm.
which really bothers me in a dark way that I haven't been able to really think through, because humor seems to be a kind of catalyst for hate. It seems to normalize hate. Like you say, basically it's like Louis C.K. says a lot of edgy things,
Mhm.
but you take something Louis C.K. says and do it in a non-funny way and do it over and over and over and keep increasing the hatefulness of it, the vitriol,
Mhm.
and somehow you find yourself like Alice in Wonderland in a world full of hate where there's no good and evil. It's all the same. In fact, the good is to be mocked and the evil is to be celebrated for the humor of it. Basically, not taking the ideas of evil seriously. And I don't know what it reveals something about human nature that you can let go,
Mhm.
the moral relativism that can happen when you do that kind of stuff.
If you like watching videos like this one, like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video.
At the same time, I'm a fan of dark humor when done well. Anyway, for people who are not familiar, I just wanted to mention that some of the worst hate speech that ends in LOL happens in gaming communities.
Yeah,
And that's where you come from in
yeah.
certain part.
So a lot of people don't remember this or don't know this because they're younger, but way back in the day, in the late 90s, early mid 2000s of the internet, the way that online kind of like shit talk worked was you were just trying to ramp up to the most insanely edgy, crazy stuff you could say to like provoke a reaction. Have you ever heard of something called the aristocrats? That it's like a
Mhm.
joke, the joke.
Oh yeah, the joke. Yeah, there's a movie on it. Yeah.
Okay. Basically, every single like shit talk back and forth on the internet was like that. Like, what is the most increasingly depraved? And back then, you didn't get banned for slurs or anything on any of these chat rooms. So it was just like an insane world to walk into. And I was fully 100% a part of, a product of, and a contributor to that world.
So
And I
that
did like
probably
I do have to agree the gaming world is super toxic. I'm not one to really get offended at anything. The worst part about it, I think, is that kids hear that language because there's a lot of kids playing video games. Then they use it while they're playing video games. And then it translates into their everyday life because they believe that's how people communicate. As a matter of fact, I like to play video games sometimes just to escape, but I only play single player games because I don't want to be called the N word by a 9-year-old. There is just a ton of anger from folks in online gaming because it's way easier for people to be a tough guy anonymously behind a headset. You know, these people would never in their life go up to someone and have the balls to say the same shit they say to someone online. A lot of times, and I'm sure it's not everyone, I just have to suspect that these people don't like themselves very much and they're unable to work through their own stuff. So, online gaming provides them a vehicle to anonymously take out their own stuff on strangers. I guess that's a little bit of a tangent, but just my thought. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
still goes on the internet in some way, and that probably still goes on the internet in a maybe more pacified way.
only in darker parts of the internet. I'd say for the most part, well, compared to back then, compared to 20 years ago, the internet is way cleaned up now. There are still going to be boards you can go on or parts of the internet where you see that type of humor, but not nowhere near as mainstream. Like back then, you could open your mic on Xbox Live and hear some insane stuff when that first started. Nowhere near what you'd hear today. Although
But
it's, yeah.
there's still elements of escalation that happen. That just seems to be part of human nature
Mhm.
on the internet. Because we don't get the feedback of actually hurting people
Mhm.
directly. So the trolling, like for the lulls, you'll do like whatever, like you will still escalate within the bounds. You're just saying that there's more bounds now on Reddit.
Yeah.
There's more bounds and so on. So there's moderators that kind of yell at you,
Mhm.
that ban you and so on if you cross those bounds. But overall, that basic human instinct to escalate, uh, especially under the veil of anonymity, is still there. I don't know. It's dark. It's dark.
Destiny said something like, it used to be that you were trying to ramp up and say the most edgy, crazy thing you could say to invoke a reaction. I still think that goes on in gaming, and I think still Destiny still participates in that. And I think he does it to get views and attention and to come across as, like he said, edgy. If Destiny doesn't use certain words now, it has nothing to do with him learning a lesson. It's that he makes a lot of money and doesn't want to get canceled or kicked off whatever platform. If he thought there weren't consequences that would affect his livelihood, he'd use the most vile words all the time. He's just a hateful, angry person. But we want to hear from you. What did you all think about this conversation about hateful language and Destiny's use of it between Lex Fridman and Destiny? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, as always, really appreciate you watching, and we will see you on the next one.